Hello again, everybody. I'm Chris Mooneyham, and welcome to the TCA All Sports Report. As always, brought to you by Fox 5 Atlanta, 680 The Fan, and of course, the Touchdown Club of Atlanta. Thanks for joining us this week, everybody. We've got a long, busy show, so let's get right into it and find out about new potential GHSA rule changes and what's happening. Well, we've talked extensively about the GHSA Executive Committee spring meetings that took place this past weekend in Macon, Georgia. Each year, the GHSA obviously gets together twice a year, as a matter of fact, to go through potential rule changes that certain coaches or regions or counties or city districts, of course, that will recommend to the GHSA. And there have been some pretty significant changes that have been made that we will look forward to potentially next year or the year after. Most notably on the gridiron. There have been now limits on full contact during football practices that pretty much follow the guidelines recommended last summer by the National Federation of High Schools, the NFHS. These rules were passed by the GHSA's Executive Committee unanimously. The rules I'm about to go through here. Preseason practice is where we will begin things. Full contact shall be allowed in no more than 2 consecutive practices per week. Again, this is in preseason. Full contact not allowed in more than 2 consecutive practices per week. Full contact during that practice shall be limited to not more than 45 minutes per day, and that full contact shall be limited to 135 minutes per week. During any two-a-days, a dying phrase in all of football, during two-a-days, only 1 session per day shall include full contact. Regular and postseason practice rules now. Full contact during practice shall be allowed in no more than 3 practice days per week. Let me scroll down here. There are so many rules. Full contact during practice shall not be allowed on more than 2 consecutive days. And I know a lot of this is good. There's a lot of minutia here, and I can't repeat everything. I'll try to repeat some of the more important things, but if you have obviously any details, you can tap most of your major media disseminators of information, for lack of a better phrase, like GHSA.net. You can actually go to GHSA.net and read the entire minutes of the Spring Executive Committee, of course, the AJC, the Marietta Daily Journal, the Gwinnett Daily Post. All of your local newspapers and media outlets will have this information. Okay, back to regular season and postseason practice now. Full contact during practice shall be limited to not more than 30 minutes per day and 90 minutes per week. That's pretty significant. 90 minutes per week, and that's all the kids are allowed to have full contact during the preseason. Coaches have to form written plans that will be followed. These apparently will be checked either weekly, monthly, or by the end of the year. Violations to any of these rules. The penalty, and I'm going to read this verbatim now, the penalty to be imposed upon any member school found to have violated this bylaw in any substantial manner shall be as follows. First offense, a fine of not less than $500 but not more than $2,500. Per the violation at the discretion of the executive director, of course that being Gary Phillips. Second offense, the school shall be placed on probation and not eligible for postseason play. Not eligible for postseason play. So you see just how serious the executive committee is about this. When possible, an athletic trainer should also be present at all practices and games. The GHSA's policy, and I'm reading again verbatim here, the GHSA's policy is almost identical to the recommendations that came out of the National Federation of State High School Associations Concussion Summit Task Force. So, that's big news. Big news. Obviously, many of you out there watching have mixed emotions, mixed feelings about this. You know what? We'll save it for another day. Perhaps we'll save it for the My Take segment of the program, either this week or next week. We'll figure that out later. One move that I absolutely love that the GHSA has decided to do, they're moving state playoff basketball games in the quarterfinal round back to neutral sites, and this will begin next year. This is really an absolutely great move. In fact, this is my favorite move of all of the decisions that the GHSA Executive Committee came across. I think this is important for numerous reasons. It helps with travel costs for schools, for parents, for the kids, the parents, but you know what I mean. It enables also, as somebody who earns quite a living broadcasting high school sports, as I work for Play On Sports in the NFHS network, every year you can see the state semifinals for basketball and, of course, the finals on various media outlets. Of course, the finals broadcast by our friends over at GPB, and I am every year on the play-by-play for the state semifinals in a specific location. But moving the quarterfinals now to a neutral site location allows media outlets like, say, the NFHS network to come in and broadcast these games, which will then enable parents who cannot make it to a particular game watch that game, and of course for family members that are outside of the state. And most importantly, quite obviously, this also returns the advantage to a potential region champion, or takes away the advantage from one region champion over another region champion, because remember, once you get to the quarterfinals in high school basketball, you're more than likely going to have a number one seed from one region facing another number one seed from a different region, and a lot of times, obviously, that comes down to a coin flip as to who gets to host. And coaches, of course, have had quite a problem with this over the last few years since we changed to home location. So this will be in a neutral site, going to be kind of a sectional field. If you remember the old days of Georgia high school basketball, this will be more like a sectional field where you'll see teams from the north play in the north, teams from middle Georgia play in Macon, so on and so forth. Also, they did pass what we've all come to call the Wheeler rule now. Teams will be subject to being allowed to play. Basketball teams will depending on the situation, be allowed to play in postseason national championship type basketball tournaments. The Swainsboro Holy Innocents rule, if you will. Now all schools in the basketball championships, well, not just the championships, also during the regular season, all schools host schools will be required to provide an adult 21 years and over to be the scorekeeper in all varsity games. They voted down the opportunity to increase baseball games during the regular season. I'm mixed on that rule. We talked about that here last week when we were getting ready for the meetings. Don't dislike this rule. In fact, if you increase the number of baseball games, there was a threat that you would get rid of the region tournaments, and I didn't like that. So this is a very good move, I think. And the committee also finally passed the rule softening on transfers, also, of course, known as the Demetris Robertson rule. Again, for more details, you can pretty much tap any of the media outlets that you usually tap for your high school information. And, of course, you can go to ghsa.net for the exact minutes and far deeper details into the spring executive committee meeting. Coming up next, we delve back into history with Ever Wonder. The Touchdown Club of Atlanta is one of the nation's oldest football clubs. Founded in 1938 for the promotion of high school and college football, the club has stayed true to the same format for 7.5 decades. The club awards high school players of the week each week during the regular season for outstanding performances on the field. And of course, at the end of each season, we select a back of the year and a lineman of the year, chosen from the deep pool that is Metro Atlanta high school football. On rare occasions, the back of the year and the lineman of the year will both come from the same team. In fact, the first time this happened was in 1946. The second time it happened was in 1986. And 86, well, a pivotal year, the beginning of a modern dominant program. Much like last week when we talked about Parkview High School, that team that was honored in 1986 was, well, the beginning of another, as I said, modern dominant program, the McEachern Indians. The players selected that year were Kevin Espy, who was the back of the year, and David Summers, who was the lineman of the year. Now, remember, McEachern started playing football way back in the mid-1950s, and by the time head coach Jimmy Dorsey arrived for his first season in 1984, the program enjoyed only 4 winning campaigns in those 30 plus years. Coach Dorsey's impact was immediate. In 1983, the previous year to him arriving, they were 4-6. In '84, they won 3 more ball games, finished at 7-3, and narrowly missed the playoffs. In '85, the Indians were 9-2-1 and made it to the region final, a first for the school. By '86, Coach Dorsey had his team poised to be the first team to win a region championship and enter the high school playoffs. And of course, remembering now that you would win your sub-region and then have to play a playoff game, which was the region playoffs, to move on into the state tournament. I'm sure most of you out there, if you're watching this, you probably already know that. Kevin Espy was entering his 3rd year as the starting quarterback, and of course running that wing T offense, or more precisely for McEachern in those days, the Delaware wing T offense, really quite challenging. But for Espy, in that senior year, by the way, that kid was 6 foot 180. He really had a dominant year. In fact, he finished the season with just under 1,200 yards through the air and 22 scores, and rushed for an additional 584 yards and hit pay dirt, as Brad says, 13 times. About as good as you can get as a wing T quarterback. That offense that year, by the way, averaged 40 points per ball game and 400 yards of total offense. That year they ran the straight 52 defense, and this defense in '86 was incredibly dominant. In fact, they were dominant to the tune of allowing just 7 points per ball game on average, and had 8 shutouts in 1986. And as we all know, well, some of you may know, but when you're running that 52 defense, you've got to have 2 stout linebackers. And of course, they did. David Sumners was 6'3", 220 pounds, the senior was, and next to him was future All-State and TCA Player of the Year, junior, 6'2", 220, Keith Steed, a name that will, of course, bring back a lot of memories for you Cobb County people out there. McEachern would run the table during the regular season in 1986, and in the region finals, they would face Douglas County. It's an old Cobb County guy. We called him DC back in the old days, but they faced Douglas County in that region final, a rematch of a Week 5 matchup where McEachern absolutely handled them 48-0. As is so often the case once you get into the playoffs, even against a team you dominated during the regular season, somehow, some way, that team will step up and play you tougher. McEachern did win the ball game and did win that championship, but they only won the ball game 22-10. Sadly, the magical season would come to an end in a loss to East Cobb's Walton Raiders. It was a hard-fought game that Walton would put away with a spectacular 88-yard kickoff return early in the 4th quarter. The Indians would see their season end in a 35-28 loss, and the state playoffs would have to wait for at least one more year. It was a special season for McEachern, Kevin Espy, and David Sumners, and the Touchdown Club of Atlanta, as they would honor Kevin again as the back of the year, David as the lineman of the year. This season, of course, would propel McEachern to the powerhouse that they are to this day. Since the arrival of Jimmy Dorsey in 1985, and again, Brad Walsh always puts together our Ever Wonder portion of the program, and Brad tells us that since '84, the Indians have had 15 seasons of winning 10 or more ball games. That sounds absolutely right, and have had only one losing record. The Indians are doormats no more, Brad says, and home to some of the best sports and campus facilities in the state of Georgia. Kevin Espy attended App State and earned 2 varsity letters for the Mountaineers. Kevin now lives in Cobb County and works for Cobb EMC. Brad goes on to tell us that David Sumners will go on to Vandy and play for the Commodores. He also lives here in Atlanta and is a mortgage banker. Coming up next, in the What's Next portion of our program, we look ahead to the award season schedule, but more importantly, we're creeping up on the championship month of May. Okay, this is the week, the week where we start to see the sun peeking through the clouds that is the horizon of GHSA sports. What in the world kind of analogy is that? That's what I get for flying off the cuff. What I'm getting at is we are now on the verge of the championship bonanza that is the month of May. And of course, because the month of May is full of championships across the GHSA high school sporting landscape, obviously now as we start to get into the end of April, this is where regular seasons will start to wind down, we'll start to get into the playoffs, and this is actually where it starts to get really fun, especially not just this week, but next week. First of all, though, we will crown another state champion coming up this weekend, Friday, April 24th, to be precise, at the Westminster Schools, over on West Paces Ferry. It's the 2015 GHSA State Gymnastics Meet. You can watch it live on the NFHS Network, and of course archived a couple of days later. The meet starts at 7 p.m. Tickets are $7 at the door. Again, the 2015 GHSA State Gymnastics Championship Meet at the Westminster Schools over on West Paces Ferry. 7 p.m. First Lady hits the mat or the pommel horse or the rings, what have you. Tickets 7 p.m. $7 at the door. Soccer wraps up its regular season on Wednesday. Tennis begins its state playoffs on Thursday, and golf, track, and baseball all end their regular seasons this weekend. Mentioned it a couple of times over the last couple of weeks, but this is, again, award season. The good folks over at Positive Athlete Georgia, people who have really, to be honest with you, become very good friends of the TCA because they're doing things right. This is, again, an organization, for those of you who have not heard about it here on the All Sports Report, honors not just the best athletes from across the state of Georgia, no, not all-state performers, not championship performers, but student athletes that have great grade point averages, contribute to their schools, their communities, their churches, so on and so forth. And that's what Positive Athlete Georgia is all about. Every year, at the end of the year, they have a series of award shows. And I know I talked about this last week, but it bears repeating because this week and next week is the meat of the awards season. On the 22nd, it's the Cobb County Awards at North Star Church in Kennesaw over on Blue Springs Road. You still got time to get involved with Positive Athlete Georgia, by the way, and become a potential sponsor for an award for some of these young people. Then on the 24th, also at North Star Church in Kennesaw, the Northwest Georgia Awards. On the 27th, the North Georgia Awards incoming. And on the 28th, the very next day, the South Atlanta Awards. That'll be down in Fayetteville. Of course, for the full schedule, and we'll talk about the rest of the award shows as we get closer to them, but for the full schedule and to find out more about Positive Athlete Georgia, just visit georgia.positiveathlete.org for further details. It's a program that I am so very blessed to be a part of. If you make it out to one of the shows, you'll hear my voice. I'm the for lack of a better phrase, and I hesitate to use it, trust me, the voice of God. I'm kind of the above MC out there in listener land, but we'd love for you to take part in any way that you can. Again, 22nd, 24th, 27th, and 28th. Those are the next 4 shows coming up. We'll have 2 in May, and then, of course, the big state award show will be June 2nd. At the College Football Hall of Fame down on Marietta Street. Coming up next in the My Take portion of our program, open-mindedness inside the GHSA. Over the last 10 years, probably actually 15 years or so, the GHSA has really shown itself to be far more open-minded than perhaps they were in previous years, and really far more liberal, falling into line, and rightfully so, I believe, I don't mean that in a negative way, as far as being not just retroactive, but proactive in changing rules, seeing when certain situations could turn into problems in the future. Now, we've talked about numerous situations throughout this season here on the TCA All Sports Report, and we have rehashed some of those problems as time has gone on, when the second part or third part of some of these stories have come out, transfer rules, the Wheeler rule, basketball controversies, things of this nature. But these things are always going to crop up. All governing bodies cannot completely be ahead of every situation that's going to crop up. It is, after all, governing bodies' jobs, their backbone, the backbone of their jobs, to change rules when they see it be fit. In other words, well, how are they going to see that it's fit? Well, when problems crop up. Sometimes you can't be proactive, but sometimes you can. And I figured I'd take this opportunity this week to commend the GHSA. Commend the GHSA for being not just retroactive, but, of course, proactive in the changing of some of these rules. It didn't seem fair that Wheeler couldn't play in a national tournament. They said as much. Some of the officials in the GHSA said, yeah, this rule might be a little antiquated. Of course, the reason for the rule was to provide a guideline to protect the kids, the safety of the kids, so they don't play too many basketball games. And therein lies the great motivator for that particular aspect of the rule, the safety of the kids. But if you've got one team, one particular year, that can go to a national championship type tournament and play only 3 games in an Elite 8 format, well, then that probably doesn't hurt that team. And besides, as we all know, it's not going to be a situation every single year. In being proactive, however, when it comes to, say, the transfer rule, this is becoming a situation. And many people would say that the GHSA dragged their feet in this situation. I would lie somewhere in the middle. Not that they dragged their feet, not that they're being completely proactive either, but somewhere in the middle. And we've had probably just enough problems to try to figure out what we can do, and we still have a very long way to go. Most importantly, the GHSA has been willing to change, and as I've said a couple of times, be proactive. Not afraid to make changes and then potentially go back to the previous way of doing things, like, say, moving the state quarterfinals back to a sectional or neutral site location. We tried it one way in some cases, and it didn't work. So let's go back to the other way. Or we've tried it this way for years, and obviously now that's not working. So let's change it. Commendable. That's what I say for the GHSA so far, at least on the heels of this year's GHSA Spring Executive Committee meeting. Until next week, I'm Chris Mooneyham. Thanks for joining us for this week's TCA All Sports Report.